Hello everybody, my name is KirkpattieCake. I'm an author and robot, and today I'm going to answer the question that everybody has been wondering about for a very long time. For a decently amount of time. I haven't really been around that long, but... Are you a masochist, Ian? Are you? So that's going to be the question that I answer today. But before we get started, a couple of things. Number one is the Pitch Fit. If you have a book, if you are a creator, check out Pitch Fit in the link down below to maybe have your book pitched on this channel. Second thing is LBRY for July is open. This is the last week, I think, to get your LBRY in. Okay, technically, yes, this is the last week because I'll be making the video over the weekend. So pretend that June ends on the 27th, and if you want to be a part of LBRY, get it in before the get your short story in before. With that said, let's get started. So today's topic is only vaguely related to Ian. Why do you read books that cause you physical pain? Are you a masochist? Well, the answer might just surprise you. But there's a lot of good to be said about reading widely, reading outside of your genre, reading your contemporaries, reading your less than contemporaries that you still, your classics, whatever. Reading your classics that you may not have interest in. There's a lot of reason to read outside of your genre, outside of your expectation, and to, in general, just read widely. And that's really what I want to talk about today is there are reasons to, one, read bad books. Number two, read books that are outside of your genre. And three, just in general, read across the spectrum. Number one good reason for why reading widely is a good thing to do, it informs how stuff should be written and should not be written. So one of the benefits of reading really bad fiction or fiction that you are critical of, because clearly there are people who enjoy the books that I did not enjoy. So there's always that to keep in mind is if you're ever feeling down on your own writing and whether or not your books are worthy of anything, go and look at your favorite books on Goodreads and then go to the 1-star reviews and see people that absolutely hated the books that you loved and you're like, okay, I think I'm going to be okay. But reading books and analyzing books for whether they're well written or not can show you how good writing can be done and also how bad writing can be done. I know personally, I have references, I highlight, and I have references for certain things that I struggle with. Am I struggling with character description? Am I struggling with room description? Am I struggling with dialogue? And so as I read and I find stuff that I like, I highlight it, and I remember that I now have that as a reference in the case that I get stuck. Now, the benefit of reading poorly written fiction is that often we can receive feedback in crit groups from our beta readers, from wherever, that we might think that critique is out of line, we don't understand it, we have no problem like reading the issues that other people are telling us they have. By reading those same critiques but on other people's work or making those critiques on other people's works, you're kind of better able to see it objectively and go, oh, since I'm not so much into this person's head as I am in my own head with my own characters, I can see how that doesn't work and why I don't like it. And so by seeing other people do the same bad habits that you might do, it kind of puts it into perspective and it can make it easier to identify and then shift. In fact, reading bad fiction or what you consider poorly written fiction or just identifying things that you don't like can help a lot in creating a story that doesn't have those elements because now you can recognize them slightly better. One of the things I especially always focus on when I'm reading fiction is, do these choices make sense to where this is going? And as I've done more reading, as I get into more people's story, I look for things that seem like they're kind of big deals, kind of big hints. And you never want to leave something that seems like a big kind of deal and then let it go away. So that's a whole lot of vague. So when I was writing Bleed More, Body More, I am not a writer who plots everything out. I kind of get my character voice, my main character voice, I get my starting position, and then I get an idea of where I need them to go. And it might not be a big deal, thing. So with Bleed More, Body More coming out in October, pre-order now, I knew that I had Joey, and she started out in a park, and to go get her friend's car because she worked as a mechanic. And the very first turn point that I needed her to get to was I needed her to find the ghost town that's underneath Baltimore. That's all that I knew. So her goal, find her friend, and the place that I needed to get her eventually was the ghost town. I didn't know how I was going to get there, so I just set her in position and she started moving in that direction. And that is often how I write. I bring this up because once she finds that ghost town, this is in the first third of the book, she's being returned to Earth because she's not dead, and she learns about the river Styx. If you fall in, you drowned on regret. Now, I didn't know what that was going to be. I didn't know what was going on in the story when I was writing this situation. I didn't know any of it. I just had that phrase come up, and I was like, that phrase, that thing sounds ominous. And so as I wrote the story forward, I continued to think of, fall in the river Styx, you'll drown on regret, and how would that affect story? That had to come back, because if I didn't bring that back, it is such an ominous phrase that would stand out to you while reading a story. But I knew that if I didn't bring that back up, it would feel like a dead, like, what was the point of doing that? Kind of like if you bring up and mention a gun, the famous Chekhov's gun. If you bring up something that's extraordinary, individual, unique, somewhere in there, it's kind of expected that it's going to have a payoff later on. And as I read more and as I write more, I can identify, at least in my own work, what I think is going to be something important that has to come back later, or that helps me plan for when I do revisions of, okay, I need to set this up so it shows up over there. And as I read, I look for those same hints. And if the author does not give me those hints, or they give me those hints, but they never come back later, it stands out more. So anyways, point being, reading widely informs the way that you're writing. It informs how good writing looks and how bad writing looks, and you get a better perspective on what it is you're looking for. Another great reason to read widely is you grow your vocabulary. So reading classics and stuff from other languages, stuff from other time periods, is probably more likely to expand your vocabulary with different words that we don't use now. But reading contemporary stuff will experience you to what your peers are using in current fiction or current writings. Now, you don't have to copy your peers. It's all about your own style. But it does tell you what people are using and what it looks like when somebody is using a thesaurus badly. But reading grows your vocabulary. There's no argument there. It exposes you to words. Word exposure means knowing more words. Another great reason to read widely is it can bring inspiration. So we can get inspiration from all sorts of places, like I was talking about on Monday. I got character inspirations from listening to a song without even realizing that was what was going to happen. I just was like, I'm feeling the vibes in here somewhere. I don't know what's going to happen, but the vibes. And so when you're reading fiction, maybe you read something that's so bad that you're like, I can write this, but I can write this better. And so that takes you off. Or, look, 50 Shades of Grey started out as a Twilight fan fiction. Okay, so anything, reading widely can bring you ideas to incorporate into your own work. It can give you ideas on how to use something in a new way that you never thought of using before. It can just be like, I can do this better. Reading widely exposes you to those things. Reading widely also has the benefit of helping improve your understanding. The more you read, the more you understand a different perspective. So you'll hear me say this a lot, that I think, one, books and fiction are kind of the most raw way that you get into anybody's head, because we're all betraying our points of view, our humor, our styles inside of the way that we create characters, the way that we craft stories, and the way that our stories move. Some people are not as good at hiding their perspectives in fiction as others, but you can still tell a lot about a person through the fiction that they write. Now, that's not saying that your bad guys share your opinions or your good guys share your opinions, but the way that you approach the good, the bad, how you present characters, the world views in the book, it'll say stuff about the compassion, about the stuff that you agree with, the stuff that you don't agree with, partially in the ways if people are, not every time, but it can give it away if you're really, really harsh to certain opinions and really, really not harsh to other opinions. Like if you look at the Marquis de Sade, both in his fiction and his nonfiction, he'll talk about how stupid he thinks religious people are, and he mistreats religious people and virtuous people very specifically, because it has to do with his worldview, and he hates very virtuous people. So that's how he treats them. And you can see it in the continuation of how he always treats virtuous and godly people in his books and how he rewards the non-virtuous people in his books. And it's not as slap in the face as some of the stuff that we get right now with contemporaries, but it is very clearly that his worldview is very clearly in his work. And so if you're worried about empathizing, if you're worried about writing people who don't think or act like you, one of the best things that you can possibly do for yourself is to pick up books that are by people who are deliberately not, or to deliberately pick up books by people who are very much unlike you. It can be nonfiction, it can be fiction, it can be political, it can be non-political, it can be stuff that you might find offensive as humor or as storytelling. It can be stuff that you find non-offensive. But if you want to understand other perspectives, you have to disengage your defensive-ness, your judgment, and read perspectives that are unlike your own, that expose you to thought patterns that aren't like your own, and you'll become a better writer for it. Specifically, if you don't judge people for thinking differently than you. I think one of the big problems that a lot of authors have is they can't turn off the judgy in their head for opinions or characters or behaviors that are not considered moral in their opinion, and that makes it much harder to write those characters just doing their thing. Look, I don't agree with everything that a lot of my characters do, especially in Dead End Tribe, currently available if you want to check it out, but I don't necessarily cast judgment over them either. They all, in a way, they all die to their own vices if they are obsessed with their thing. If you look at Alex, I'm going to mildly go some spoiler here. If you look at Alex, he cannot get out of being the sidekick. And that's part of what his whole thing is. He is the gay best friend, and he hates it, but he cannot get out of it. And ultimately, that is what dooms him. Ellie was an ugly duckling child, and she got a complex. She grew a complex out of all of these adults and people making fun of her for being ugly growing up, to the point that she restructured herself physically to be one of the most beautiful women on the planet. Of course, it was all fake, but who cares? Because she still got men to martyr themselves to serve her, and so she would humiliate them, and eventually her thought that she can manipulate men with her looks and nothing else, that becomes her folly. You have Clint, who is very, very egotistical and very, very cocky, and he becomes a victim to that vice. But it's never causing judgment. It's, if you take something to this extreme, what is it blinding you to, and how is it going to make you lose? And you kind of see that in a lot of them. But reading widely, reading opinions, especially reading perspectives that are especially unlike your own, which is one of the reasons why I picked up the Fighting Storm series to begin with, was to get a look into how LBRY thinks, how she writes, what her characters look like, how the world looks like to her. And I got a picture of that through those characters. So deliberately read unlike yourselves. Hopefully it turns out all right in many cases, but it will always make your writing better. Just also make sure to intermix good books and bad books, because you write like how you read as well. Another good reason to read widely is that reading is research. So when you're reading, especially from different genres, you're learning what genre conventions look like. You're learning what contemporaries and classics and big people in other genres are doing, and whether your book eventually might fall into one of those genres. It's especially important if you're, I don't know, I wanted to say that it's especially important if you're writing widely, or you're writing a lot of different ideas into your series or your books, so that you can see what other people in your genre are doing. And if you don't read widely, you may not be able to figure out what your genre is. There are many cases of this, but this happens a lot actually. But if you read a lot in your genre, kind of around your genre, then you kind of see more people using more elements of these different things, and how those elements fit into whatever genre it is they're declaring their book as. And so that makes finding your genre easier. Now, what is the point of the genre? So when you start writing your book, you don't necessarily need to know what your genre is. That might come out later. You might figure it out during revision. You might have friends or family or beta readers tell you what your genre is. But finding your genre and appropriately labeling your genre is very important in order to find your readers. Because if you market something as a sci-fi, but it is actually a romance, you're going to you're setting the expectations for your readers that this is a sci-fi book, and they are not prepared for the romance. Now, if you've written a romance and you say that it's a romance, then you're going to attract those who are looking for romance, and they will be more receptive to what you're writing. Mismarketing your book based on genre to the wrong readers is something that can really, really, really hurt your scores and really just who finds your book and recommends your book. So it's very important to know your genre, to read across genres, to see what other people in your genre are doing and what counts as being in your genre, and to know what genre titles mean. So these all kind of go in together into one, but reading widely also is said to build empathy and emotional intelligence, helps you learn from people, and also improves brain function, probably from challenging all of those things. And I think this goes to an earlier point that I made, where if you look at stories told from a different perspective, if you try to understand those perspectives rather than judging them, try to see the world as they're trying to present them to you. And that's different than saying, hey, this is a well-written story or this is a poorly written story. Is you're seeing the perspective, the ways that decisions are made. You can see a lot about a person, like I said with The Fighting Storm, is I think that you can very easily tell that the author of that book loves her characters. There is a lot of love written into the interactions with the main characters in that book, that you can tell that she really cares about those characters. She adores them, and she didn't want anything bad to happen to them. Now whether that makes a compelling story or not is something else entirely, but you can start seeing sort of what values are out there, what people judge, what people pay attention to, how people craft their villains, and how their villains interact with other people. Like, if you've just got a really, really bad guy, there are a lot of situations where people will just make their central villain everything in the kitchen sink that they can think of, which is a bad quality. They're a murderer, they're a pedophile, they're a rapist, they're a racist, they're everything that you can think of with no redeeming qualities. It's just pile on the worst. And then their main character might be an asshole, but nobody calls them out on being an asshole. And that says something about the morality used in the perspective of the author, whereas, well, this can be overlooked because this person is a worse person. And I mentioned this a lot, I think, in many of my reviews. I remember in The Stars We Steal, I mentioned this. I think I mentioned this with the Cruella movie discussion that I did a little while ago, where it's always pitting somebody bad against somebody worse, so the bad doesn't look as bad as at least they're not that person. And that exposes some perspective. If there are no consequences to the main character for acting poorly, that exposes some perspective. And so reading widely kind of gets you into the heads of these different people. So again, I highly recommend specifically picking up books from authors whom you may have other disagreements with, just to see what perspective they have, where they're coming from, and if you can decode maybe some of their perspective. I highly recommend you do not go at this with a determination to judge, with a determination to, you're going to disagree, with a determination to be like, well, I know that you're like this, so it's going to be terrible. Go in with the decision to be empathetic and understanding, and try to see the world that they have created for you to experience. And that is really what will build the empathy and emotional intelligence, and it'll improve your brain function because you're stretching yourself beyond the world that you know. Reading widely also has the benefit of learning what is in the current market. Now, you may not agree with what is in the current market, you may not like what is in the current market, but it is still important to know what is being pushed to the top of the current market, be it on the bestseller lists, on the curated book lists by New York Times or USA Today, or whoever else has book lists. It is important to see which peers are kind of at the top of whatever, even if it is, even if they bought the position. You want to see what your contemporaries are doing. As great as classic books or even books from 20 years ago are, it is important to read both old books and new books to get new perspective on current history, on previous history, on current culture, on previous culture. I would definitely say one of my favorite books at this point in time is The Shrine of Jeffrey Dahmer by Brian Masters, and that was published in 1991 or 1992, just after when Jeff was arrested. And there is so much philosophical talk in there, along with the legal talk, along with the psychological talk, along with the biography, that it is just so good. I love that book for all the different ways that Brian Masters approaches Jeff and his life. But also, that is, what, a 30-year-old story now? So, of course, it's going to be important to me since I'm writing a story inspired by Jeffrey Dahmer, but also it's not necessarily a contemporary story that kind of goes along with stuff going on today. So reading contemporaries, be it fiction or nonfiction, or at least looking at titles, seeing what's at the front of the stores, kind of trying to get an idea. I know it's like all what Stephen King and Stephanie Meyer and just names that we all know. Come on, guys, it's time for some new blood. Let's get some new blood in there. I've got some books for your shelves. I promise you, you'll have a good time. You'll at least remember something. I don't know. I think the last thing that I want to say on this is that by reading widely, you can find new genres that you enjoy that you may not have ever figured out you enjoyed before. I try not to label stuff too much, just to get a general sense of stuff when I'm going to read it. But I like kind of weird fiction, kind of off fiction. I actually apparently read a lot more thriller and sort of mystery or PI stuff than I realized. I say more PI than mystery. But I tend to look for stuff with weird elements in it, because that's really what I'm looking for, is to be surprised. Something realistic but with magical elements, or something with just casual bizarreness in it. Or like, you know, Dead End Drive, it adds the personality to the house, and with the whole background of the house and the lore of the house. And then you've got Angus over there, who's basically a Scottish folk legend, and it's just accepted that he's basically a folk legend. And I love that kind of stuff, where it's that mixture of reality and fantasy, where you've got the same thing in Bleed More, Body More, where you've got limbo underneath Baltimore on top of just regular Baltimore. It's just kind of accepted that that's part of life, other than, you know, Joey being like, what the frick, this is here. But I love that kind of stuff, where it offers its ability to just be familiar but surprising at the same time. When there's way too much world building, I kind of just zone out because I don't have anything to attach to. But you know, there are lots of people. I feel like fantasy is one of the biggest genres outside of romance. Anyway, those are my thoughts on reading widely. No, I'm not a masochist. Maybe a little bit I'm a masochist. What other excuse do I have? Oh no. But my recommendation is to read widely. Right now, what do I have on my book list? Right now I have The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner by James Hogg, and this was first published in 1824. And then I have, what's it called? The Butcher Boy, which was published in 1992, and that one is Irish fiction. And then I'm reading Breach of Peace by Daniel Green. So I've got like a mix, who is a contemporary. So I've got a nice little mix of only 100 years, you know? What can I say? And eventually I'm going to read, I have a Frank Peretti book over there that I'm supposed to read eventually. I have some other books that I'm supposed to read eventually. I think I also have a book, Beauty Queens by LBRY. But it's been a crazy week, okay? I'm sorry. It's just, I guess that's the video on reading widely. Let me know what you think on reading widely, or any of the topics I've brought up in this. What are you currently reading right now? Do you read widely? Do you read outside of a genre, or do you read within a small amount of genre? And again, this is not to demonize anybody that likes to read within a genre. That's perfectly fine too. But these are the benefits of reading outside of a specific genre. Always be surprised. I at least have that for sure. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. No judgment for whatever genres you read or whatever genres you don't read. These are just my opinions, but I'm just a robot. So thank you so much for joining me here today. If you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, subscribe for more. And until next time, have a great weekend, and don't die.
The only people who should come are those who want to meet their monsters.
If this is what Agatha wants, I don't know how we can even dispute it.
Show me your teeth.
I change lives, baby.
And I end them. Sweetheart, no bargains hold. Only fools know restraint.
Only losers lose!
If your scissors are dull, may I recommend sharpening them with leather?
I think I hit you.
Mima says I must have a guardian angel.
To enter the ring but abstain from playing is suicidal. Your virtue makes you nothing but a liability.
You're gonna die. You're gonna die. You're gonna die.